Stay sleepless. I was playing video games in the living room when I heard a faint voice calling for help. I took off my headset and listened closely. It sounded like my dad, and he was asking for me to come to the attic. I made my way upstairs and opened the door to the attic. "Dad, are you okay?" I called out. But as soon as I stepped inside, I realized something was off. The attic was dark and empty, and there was no sign of my dad. I called out again, but there was no response. It was then that I remembered my dad was out of town on a work trip. The voice I had heard couldn't have been his. My heart started racing as I realized I was alone in the house. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease and started making my way back downstairs. But as I descended the stairs, I heard a soft whisper from behind me. I turned around, but there was nobody there. Suddenly, I felt like I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, and every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the darkness. Finally, I made it back to the living room, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. I turned on all the lights and tried to distract myself with my video games, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. To this day, I don't know what caused that voice in the attic. But one thing is for sure, I never want to be alone in that house again. I remember the time when I was a young child, and my family had just moved into an old Victorian house. My parents had told me stories of the house's history and how it was over 100 years old. I was excited to explore every nook and cranny of the house, but there was one place that always gave me the creeps: the attic. The attic was at the very top of the house, and it had a rickety old ladder that led up to it. I would always peek up there, but I never had the courage to climb up. One day, however, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go up and explore. As I climbed the ladder, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. It was dark and musty, and I could hear creaking noises from above. I finally reached the top and pulled myself onto the floor. I shone my flashlight around the room, but all I could see was dust and cobwebs. Suddenly, I heard a noise. It sounded like someone was shuffling around in the corner. My heart started racing, and I began to feel like I wasn't alone. I pointed my flashlight towards the corner and gasped in terror. There was a man with his back facing me, hunged over. His feet dangled off the ground, and his body swayed slightly. He didn't move, and I couldn't see his face. I was frozen with fear, and I didn't know what to do. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. Finally, I managed to turn around and scramble down the ladder as fast as I could. When I reached the bottom, I ran to my parents and told them what I had seen. They didn't believe me at first, but when they went up to the attic, they found the man just as I had described him. It turned out that he had been a former owner of the house who had committed suicide years before we had moved in. From that day on, I never went back up to the attic again. The thought of that man's lifeless body still haunts me to this day. I always loved exploring abandoned places, so when my friends suggested we check out the abandoned house at the end of the cul-de-sac, I eagerly agreed. It was an old, dilapidated house with boarded-up windows and a rusted gate. As we approached the house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was as if the house was staring back at us, daring us to enter. We pried open the gate and cautiously made our way up the overgrown path to the front door. The door was locked, but we managed to find a way in through a window that had been left slightly ajar. The house was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. We started exploring the first floor, opening doors and peeking into empty rooms. As we made our way up to the second floor, we started to hear strange noises. Creaks and groans echoed through the house, as if it were alive and angry that we were there. We tried to ignore it and pressed on, climbing the stairs to the attic. The attic was small and cramped, filled with old furniture and boxes of forgotten memories. Suddenly, We heard the sound of footsteps coming from below. We froze, listening intently as the footsteps grew louder and closer. We knew we had to hide, so we scrambled to find a place to take cover. I squeezed into a small space between a dusty dresser and the wall, holding my breath and trying to remain silent. As the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, my heart was pounding in my chest. I could hear my friends breathing heavily as they hid in their own hiding places. The footsteps grew louder and closer until they stopped right outside the attic door. I could hear someone fumbling with the lock, trying to get in. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as the door slowly creaked open. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as a shadowy figure stepped into the room. We didn't know who or what it was, but we could feel its malevolent presence. It seemed to be searching for something, moving slowly and deliberately around the room. I could hear my friends whimpering in fear, and I knew that we were in grave danger. Finally, the figure seemed to give up its search and turned to leave. We waited until we were sure it was gone before emerging from our hiding places. We quickly left the house, vowing never to return again. But the memory of that terrifying experience stayed with me, haunting me for weeks to come. As I climbed up the creaky wooden stairs to my grandparents' attic, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My grandparents had both passed away a few weeks ago, and my family had tasked me with the job of clearing out their old belongings. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old books and mothballs, and I found myself coughing as I made my way deeper into the attic. As I began to sift through boxes of old photos and keepsakes, I noticed a large, ornate chest tucked away in the corner. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly made my way over to the chest. I hesitated for a moment before I slowly lifted the lid, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized what I had discovered. Inside the chest were stacks of old journals, each one filled with my grandparents' handwriting. As I began to read through them, I quickly realized that my grandparents had been hiding a dark secret. The journals were filled with tales of a mysterious cult that my grandparents had been a part of for decades. They spoke of secret meetings, strange rituals, and even human sacrifice. My heart raced as I read through the gruesome details, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. As I continued to dig through the chest, I found more and more evidence of my grandparents' involvement in the cult. There were strange symbols etched into old artifacts, and even a few human bones hidden away in the corner. I felt my hands shaking as I realized that my beloved grandparents had been hiding such a dark secret for all these years. I didn't know what to do with the information I had uncovered, but one thing was certain: my world would never be the same again.